Hello and welcome to Newchip's online demo week for May 2021. My name is Armando Carvajal and I'm the Accelerator Director here at Newchip. Today we're hosting a very special conversation with Mike Fransen, an accomplished entrepreneur and veteran graduated from West Point, who then spent 5 years serving in the US Army in finance. During that time, Mike was stationed in Texas where he met his wife. He was then deployed to Kosovo. Later, he worked in the Defense Intelligence Agency. After serving his time, Mike returned to Yale to get an MBA in finance. And from there, he worked for a commercial office company called Parkway Properties, where he held various operational roles, including the COO role. Later on, Mike left Parkway to explore various opportunities involved in the future of work and work environments, ultimately founding Workng. It is a firm dedicated to consulting and managing large office assets for large institutional owners. Currently, Mike lives in Houston, Texas with his wife and his 2 teenage daughters. Mike, thank you so much for joining us at Newchip's Online Demo Week. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you, Armando, for having me. I'm probably, if you'd asked me as a kid, where would I be speaking? Startup community would probably be the bottom of the list, not because I didn't love it, just because that probably not what I thought I was built for. So it's fitting that you and I would be able to have this conversation. So appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And I love your story. I love sort of the trajectory that you've had, your journey, right, to where you've gone over the past few years. And I'd love for us to talk about this in the conversation. To start off, I mentioned right now as I was introducing you that after studying at West Point, you served for 5 years, right, in the U.S. Army, which included that major deployment to Kosovo. Tell us about this experience and how it shaped your ideas, your beliefs, your goals, ultimately for your future career.
Sure. No, it was tremendous. You don't realize it as an 18-year-old kid when you're signing yourself up for the next 9 years. You're just kind of living month to month. And so great 4 years at United States Military Academy, very rigid, very formalized training, a lot of just hands-on in ways you never imagined you'd do. And then you get thrown out into the Army and you get to apply. And just the opportunity to constantly be thrown into new situations where there is no, in some cases, much room for error, but there's also a structure in place. And in some cases, like you mentioned Kosovo, you just got to learn on the fly. It's go. There is a playbook of sorts. There is a structure, obviously, of sorts. I think people think about that when they think about the military. But in many cases, you're in new situations with new people. And in Kosovo, I was actually working with NATO headquarters. And, just the simple thing of showing up and going, who's my boss going to be? And you learn it's a major from Turkey who actually hasn't learned English yet. And I can assure you, I didn't know much Turkish at all. So, how do you figure this out? We have a meeting Saturday. We've got to explain some things. We're going to have to work this out real time. And those sort of situations, become a little overwhelming. And then at some point, you kind of flip a switch and you go, and I'm kind of craving this. I kind of, the stranger it is, the more I'm liking this. And that's good and bad. But I think for me and my experience, both leading up to the Army and then in the Army, was that sort of repetitive thing over and over again, and obviously fantastic people and important missions that you were trying to get done.
That's incredible. And I think, it definitely sounds like there was that big element of adventure and ambiguity that drove part of that experience. When you were serving, what specific sort of function of the Army were you serving?
Yeah, so a little outside the normal of what people think. I joke I wasn't GI Joe necessarily. I paid him, so I was in finance. So the kind of jobs I had involved money. So it was something as simple as when I was at Fort Hood payroll in managing different groups, which that's important. At the time, we were deploying a lot of folks. These are people leaving families behind. It's fairly complex in terms of we want these people to get all the tax benefits that you should have, when you're in a foreign country doing things on behalf of our country. And you want to get that right. So, it was leading a team to do those sorts of things. And then like I said, I worked for NATO and I was the fund manager for all the engineering projects. So if you think about the rebuilding, things that needed to go on in the late 90s, early 2000s, which is when I was there, that involved everything from roads, tunnels, bridges, airports, pretty major infrastructure that allows a country that's been pretty torn up to get back up and running and conduct commerce. So that was what it was involved there. And then my last assignment, the last couple of years, was in the intelligence community in the Washington, D.C. area, working for a defense intelligence agency. And again, a very different kind of finance operation there, but no less important than some of the other stuff I'd been involved with.
That's and it sounds like a lot of responsibility, a lot of the projects in which you were involved. How did you feel about that high grade of responsibility for a lot of major strategic endeavors at a very pivotal point in time in our history?
Some of it, I think there's some benefit to being naive. So you don't fully appreciate exactly what you're doing, and you never want to overweight it and overweight, your personal, the whole world's waiting on me, but you just kind of, and in my case, a lot of times when you're in leadership positions, you certainly want to kind of frame it for your team. You want to frame it for yourself in a way that makes it manageable, makes it easy to process. Let's not make this job bigger than it is, but let's not lose sight of the role it's going to play in the bigger picture. And so those were, important things to keep in mind. I remember in DC when I was at that job, I had family come into DC. I'm originally from the West Coast, and so we were pretty popular in our family circles. My wife's from Texas, I'm from Oregon, so a lot of people wanted to see DC. So we got away for the weekend, did the usual, check in with a couple folks that work with me the next Monday. Everything went fine, I assume, after we were, since I was gone. And they said, of course, we did have one minor glitch on that one payment we have. We got a call from the vice president's office. And I remember thinking, man, I don't remember this building having a vice president. And they said, it's the vice president. And I says, well, how did we do? They said, we did fine. So I said, good. Okay, we didn't have to give up my name. My career is not on the line. So that's an extreme example. But I mean, even that, you just never wanted to make a job bigger than it should have been. There's a task, let's get it done, and let's do it to our best ability.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think sometimes I feel like I've experienced it. I've seen many entrepreneurs experience that kind of situation. Oftentimes it's described as fake it till you make it. That kind of mentality where you're just doing it and learning along the way. Do you agree?
I do. I think we all have our own fake it till you make it story. Mine actually involved when I got to Kosovo. Those transitions are very quick actually. And so I didn't deploy as a big unit, which usually happens. It was just myself, and I was replacing the last fund manager who I knew. He was also American. And so a very sharp guy, and I expected to get this just amazing. I think he went to work. So I thought, man, of all guys, this guy's really going to do it right. And so we had a half a day, and he was still recovering from the night before that day. And so I said, all right, Steve, where's the book? He goes, there's no book. I said, all right. I said, so what do we do? He goes, you'll get it. Fake it till you make it. So, that was my fake it till you make it moment. And, I scrambled and, tried to sound smarter than I knew I was. And then eventually I let catch up with and conveying through my words. And, you hate to think that you have to do that. But as you've alluded to, I think in order to get in and through different situations, many of which have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of newness to it, you've got to kind of corral that nervousness and at least for me, be able to express it and go, and even be honest, like, I don't quite know what's going to happen next. I don't quite know, but I'm learning like crazy, and don't worry, we got it. And then you go get it.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an invaluable piece of advice for entrepreneurs, right? Because a lot of the time they don't really know what they're doing. In different aspects of the startup, whether it's fundraising, talking to investors, building a product, going to new markets. There's a ton of unknowns, right? And I think exactly as you put it, being able to take it in, understand that you probably don't know the answers to it, that you're going to figure it out, right? I think just taking that step and moving forward, which I know is very much ingrained in the U.S. Army, and keep this moving ahead. After serving in the Army, you then spent 2 years earning an MBA in finance from very prestigious university, from Yale. Tell me what motivated you to pursue this degree, and how did it ultimately pave the way for you to get into real estate?
No, absolutely. I'd love to, some of this is just very practical. I'm a pretty logical guy. So, some of it's less profound than it is just, bam, this is where I was in life. And I knew coming out of the military, there needed to be a transitional period. I knew it was hard for companies, and this was '04 when I went to business school. Some things had, happened in the business community. We had Enron. We'd had some thoughts around the value of MBAs and are there any truthful MBAs out there? So it was a strange moment in time, but I also knew there was businesses were ultimately, in a lot of corporate cases, had a lot of MBA influence, in their thought pattern. And so I knew, one, I needed some basic skills, and I was more oriented towards general management and focused on that. I knew that network-wise, I knew there was a whole world of people at the same stage of life who had just finished up 5 years of business experience that could provide a really meaningful network for the next chapter of my life. I obviously had great friends and amazing things that I still have to this day from the Army, but I knew that the MBA had really kind of nailed down and did a good job in these 2-year programs of obviously educating, but really getting a lot of thought leadership together, both through the professors and the students. And that was way more than just a degree. That was something that stuck with you. And I knew it would normalize for me what I had done. It would make it easier for a company to go, okay, I don't totally understand some of this Army lingo, but I know what I usually expect to see coming out of this business school setting. And I think this is somebody that both has the aptitude and the attitude that we would want here for current and future leadership.
And the focus was in finance, but your career has been in real estate. How did you make that jump? How did you realize that commercial real estate was something you would want to spend the next years working on?
Sure. It's specialties or, whatever emphasis in MBA is I found to be a little bit different than undergrad. I'm a system engineer from West Point. That's a pretty in-depth degree. It was basically their pre-business. For me, you got to business school. It's like, okay, it's 2 years. Pick something, that you have a few extra of those classes, and that will, dictate. So for me, it was strategy and finance. But again, I was more of a generalist, and I knew my background was operational. I knew my background was leadership. So I was really pursuing geography and fit. I married a wonderful Texan, so I'm one of these Texan by marriage. So I knew the search was going to take me geographically down to, somewhere in Texas. And I also knew that whatever I was going to get into was going to be new. I was the ultimate career changer. I definitely was not going back to that. So I didn't take a single real estate class. I did, I really tried to focus on I love marketing. Probably one of my favorite classes was actually an HR strategy class, which, if you talk to a lot of MBAs and a lot of probably entrepreneurs and you said, what do I wish they had taught us more of? The thing I hear over and over again from business schools, how the heck to deal with people. Forget the math, forget the spreadsheets. Like, it turns out human beings are the toughest animal to get your arms around and manage and be effective with. So, I had gotten what I thought was, and I still believe was very well-rounded. And so then it was about what culture is going to be the best fit? What company is going to allow somebody that's brand new to their industry to come in? I was willing to learn the business from the ground up. And then also able to quickly pivot and give me more and more P&L responsibility in an accelerated fashion. But I love the fit and the energy and the leadership and the people first. And so that's always been, even now, I'm kind of going back to those roots. I've noticed the last couple of years, I've just kind of gone, okay, let's reset this. And it's always about the people. It's always about the leadership.
Absolutely. And especially in this industry, I couldn't believe that more. Through Parkway, right, you've been involved with numerous world-class, Class A real estate properties, Parkway Realty Management, Parkway Properties. Please mistake me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about a firm with well over $4 billion in real estate portfolio, more than 21 million square feet under management in major cities like Houston, Miami, Dallas, Atlanta, among other key places. I even recall that at one point, the company was managing the Frost Tower, which is one of the most iconic and revered towers here in Austin and across Texas. How did you adapt into this new environment after your previous experiences with the MBA and in the Army? And how did you grow in Parkway?
Yeah, no, it's crawl, walk, run. I tend to want to skip a couple steps. I tend to want to be the crawl, run first. But I was fortunate in that, to Parkway's credit, and I overstayed my welcome in some ways. I mean, I never thought I'd be in one place that long, but and I can kind of describe why. We just seem to, if you stay the place long enough, I think in today's world, you end up almost being part of several companies within the same name. And so I was fortunate in that when I entered into Parkway and I took on Houston, it was a very respected but somewhat quiet publicly traded office REIT that tended to go after suburban assets. And they were in markets not like that you named. Like I said, at the time, it was Jackson, Mississippi, it was Memphis, Richmond, and Houston, and a couple of others. So different kind of markets with different drivers. And so operations was really the thing. People management, really the thing. And that was a pretty safe environment. That wasn't starting off at Frost. And in many ways, I'm probably absolutely could have done the ultimate fake it till you make it. But I was thrown on one of the most forgettable looking buildings in Stafford, Texas, you can imagine. And without, again, some of the Kosovo, not a lot of instruction. They just said, if you're going to run a portfolio, you got to run this thing. You're going to lease it. You're going to manage it. You're going to do all the engineering stuff. You're going to pick paint colors for the outside when it needs to be painted. And then Frost was really part of an era that we had merged in 2011. I think a lot of companies after 2010 had to go, golly gee, are we gonna make it? How are we getting fees? What are we doing? And timing's everything, especially in real estate. I mean, real estate especially is very sensitive to timing and market conditions. And so we merged and had kind of a switch out at the level, and found myself with kind of different leadership and a different strategy. We got out of places like Memphis and Jackson, and then one day I woke up and I was still running the same Houston portfolio. I was really honestly about ready to go, okay, I think I've outgrown this.
Yeah. And
then I get a call on vacation, which my wife thinks it's planned this way. All the time consuming calls happen on vacation, but they said, we're going to buy Thomas Properties, and you're going to now be in charge of a portfolio that includes, this was 2013, and we ended up taking over 14, 5 downtown Austin assets, which included Frost Tower. And it's going to include about that same amount of square footage in Houston. So that was game on. I mean, that was, but fortunately by then I was really craving that. Austin is where my wife and I met. Like everybody always loved Austin. So there was no way that I was not going to just attack that with a vengeance and just get after it. And obviously try not to make mistakes, but just act like I've been running downtown Class A office buildings my entire life, and just the ultimate, real estate fake it till you make it.
That's incredible. And I think, it just makes me think about what they say in life. Luck happens when you're prepared, right? And you work up to it. And sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what opportunities may come your way, but you certainly want to take those big steps and just, when that opportunity comes, seize it and make it your own and figure it out, right? Say yes, and then go learn what you need to do. And I think in your case, these opportunities are remarkable, right? And especially here in downtown Austin, the city's just booming and high rises going up and everywhere. But at that time, around 2013, still very prominent buildings. So very, very, very fascinating.
And it's interesting. You almost have to remind people, because Austin's been on such an amazing run. I had actually been with our team for up until that point, trying to underwrite buildings to buy in Austin. And the fundamentals were so questionable because there has been a dot-com bust in the early 2000s. People were still trying to figure out. Downtown was nothing like it is today, which is amazing. We're talking 7 years. It's just a totally different place.
Oh, yeah.
And I, in a sense, inherited a little bit of a hot potato, because you were getting empty space that had been law firm space, wood paneling all place. I'm touring. As soon as I get there, these new companies with young executives. This is a lot of real estate, and there's some uncertainty or what's going to happen next, and nobody quite wants to call it.
Right. Right. No, I think, and that's what's very interesting to me as well about your journey. You've been an active player in an industry that has experienced some pretty pivotal and perhaps existential moments. Tell us a little bit about the rise or the advent of WeWork during your time. How were you thinking about it, and what was sort of your positioning and participation in that realm?
Yeah, I don't think it's overstating it to say that the story I have about WeWork really reset my career. Because I was office operations until then. I would say for me was a don't let the building burn down kind of a ordeal. It was companies will do what companies do. There are professional leasing folks who will make the introductions and make the safe landings of large companies for as long as you can get them to stay. And that's how these assets will trade hands. That's the only way the capital markets can get comfortable with what is a very capital intensive business. You operations team, please just keep them happy, do the basics well, and we'll handle the rest. And what I started finding in Austin, so one of the first things people told me in Austin was, this is local. You're a new entrant and people are going to be highly skeptical. We've seen players come and go in this market. We can be enclosed if we want to. So I just started getting to know. I wanted to act as much like a native as I could. I always joked I stopped shaving and started wearing skinny jeans was in 2014. Anything I could do so I didn't look like a Houstonian in the ways that they were not liking it. And so I got to know the folks at Capital Factory, which your audience will know well, because I was getting to know either through my academy network, some startup folks who had been in the Air Force Academy, who had been in different things, and I started having lunch with these folks. And I would just ask them, I'd say, where are you guys going? I mean, you get funded. I kind of sense that once you get funded, this environment really doesn't work as well. You can't grow your team. There's some limitations. I said, where are you going? And they're just like, well, don't tell anybody, but we're signing leases at apartments. I'm going, gosh, man, that doesn't sound great. And we had some empty floors. Like I said, I was a desperate asset manager. And I'm looking at these floors, and I remember calling our CEO at the time, and I said, man, what if we broke this up, we pre-built it, and we did short-term arrangements, because we need a way to house these people. Like, I want access to this group because this is the future of our building. And we were a REIT. We had a lot of, REITs have interesting roles. They don't teach you in business school there's anything such as no bad income. I just can't even imagine going to business school and then going, there's is there anything? How can income be bad? But in the REIT world, it's true.
Yeah.
And we couldn't do it. And we had a partner at the time. And I remember talking, going, okay, how do I get to this? And they said, well, why don't we go to New York? There's this thing called co-working, and there's this new group called WeWork, and it's led by this guy in a hoodie called Adam. We should go to New York. So we did. I'm in a New York cafe with this huge pitch board, totally antiquated. We go up to WeWork and sell them, and just go, hey, you guys got to be in the middle of the country. You should be in Texas. If you're in Texas, you should be in Austin. If you're in Austin, you should be downtown. And they were just, so I'm fighting the board of directors on the REIT side who are going, co-work, what? And, WeWork's going, what? So I'm kind of, we're fighting this thing hard. And then on top of it, it's the most expensive deal we've ever done. And I mean, it just, we now know the space and the kind of things it had. But we got that deal done, Armando. And I remember calling back to CEO to thank him, to say, hey, thanks for betting your career on this too, so we can both go down together or ride high together. And I said, man, this is big. Like, this is way bigger than any deal we've ever done. I said, I don't necessarily want to have to go through that experience again with WeWork. They were very difficult as a deal to get made, but they have found their way into the back door of our industry that we left wide open. and are accommodating people and groups in ways we just have never been able to. And I remember saying at the time, I don't think we can coexist with these groups forever. I think this all has to eventually fall under one roof. And the arms race that is about to start, which did, is can they figure out how to run the rest of the building and the asset before we figure out how to run what they're doing in their space to create a seamless experience and customer experience for the customer. And we've spent the last 7 years still kind of tripping and falling through that. But I had no idea when that happened. From that point on, everything I did was totally different. I ended up, I think just frazzling my team because everything I did was, okay, let's drill. What are they doing? That was on my entree into Proptech is, we suddenly had needs I didn't used to have.
That's incredible. And I think for an industry that's been just changing so much, not just because of the WeWork or the co-working new dynamic, I wanted to call it phenomenon, but it's now a fact of life for the startup world and a lot of industries, especially in tech. Where do you see Proptech headed in the next 3 to 5 years based on how things are right now? And we could probably also jump into COVID-19, but I'd love to get your initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll maybe just back up a minute, Armando, and kind of give you my Proptech experience and how it shaped the answer to the next 3 to 5 years, if you will. I was transitioning on the leadership side in and out of different teams. We were merging with companies. We were doing stuff with companies. And on top of that, I'm taking on, and I'm kind of pushing on the team new stuff. I'm having us interact differently and we're pushing that together. And I knew one of the things that was kind of mission critical for our business is leasing. And historically, what was going on in lease transactions was it's, individual brokers' spreadsheets tracking the leases. You get fed those through an email. You talk about them on a weekly call. But it's not up to date. It just wasn't. And I'm going back and forth. I was in Austin at least 1 to 3 days a week for 3 years. So I'm going back and forth and I'm going, man, I'm burning out here quick. I've got to have access to dashboard, something here, and view the space, which is one of the early lease pipeline software showed up.
Right.
And so I thought, man, I need this. And it wasn't perfect. It was early on. We had a lot of scale, so they were all over me. We'll learn fast. You can learn fast. And we took that on. And it wasn't perfect, but man, I love the process. And our team actually learned to get excited. Now, initially, teams aren't excited to go, oh gosh, something else. But when they think they're part of something in an industry that's been kind of sleepy, they think they're on the front edge of it and they think they're participating in something that is forward leaning that could help their careers. They get on board. And I needed that. And they did. I think for me, when I look down the road 3 to 5 years of Proptech, one of the challenges and one of the things I've seen almost, the last 4 to 5 years is the difficulty of bridging the technology with the reality of the real estate. So if Proptech doesn't have enough real estate knowledge on their team, the tendency is to provide or sell or get excited about solutions nobody asked for. Or you don't understand the economics and the pressure points of somebody like me, an asset manager, operationally oriented. I had this conversation not too long ago. What you're solving for, it's so far down the expense equation, we're talking pennies. And the analogy I gave, I think I was a little nicer than this, but the analogy I described to somebody else, it's almost like being in a plane where the right engine's on fire. That's kind of the industry. The right engine's on fire, and you're describing and getting excited about the new leather upholstery you could replace the chairs inside with, right? The ultimate deck chair on the Titanic thing. And that's what I think has to happen the next 3 to 5 years is real estate has to embrace the Proptech, which sounds funny, but it really has to happen.
Yeah.
And those two have to mesh. Real estate has to go, hey, just like I did, and say, I got a problem. Is there a solution? Because if you had a solution, I think that's going to be me. It's not just me, because that's the other thing. Sometimes real estate's bad about going, hey, Proptech, I've got this really quirky, unusual problem. And Proptech's going, nobody else does. And you're having me solve, and you don't want to pay that much for it. So what are we doing? So I think the next 3 to 5 years, my hope is that we get really comfortable with problem solution, because I don't think real estate spends enough time thinking about if I've got problems, I also need Proptech to be successful. Like, they have to win. And real estate can be bad about this win-lose game where I win, maybe you win, maybe you don't.
Right.
And one of the lessons I learned out of that food hall, I remember thinking, because I needed very specific, highly sought after architects and people within Austin who had limited capacity. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling our team one time, we got to be really good clients. Like, we have to be such a good client that they don't want to work with anybody else. We pay them on time. We let them be creative. We figure out what's important to them and let them run with it, and don't make it just a beat down the whole time they're engaged with us.
Yeah, no, and I think the problem solution dynamic that you described, we see that a lot. Also, not just Proptech, but across many other industries. And I think when you're approaching it from the industry aspect, as well as from the tech or innovation side, there needs to be more conversation, right, between the two different groups, because oftentimes we see entrepreneurs building solutions for which there is no actual problem, right? And I think real estate is definitely, as you described, one of those that needs to think critically as this sort of next era of real estate comes on board. Let's talk about COVID-19, because I think this has been an incredibly pertinent subject for real estate, commercial, residential, but especially commercial. Granted, commercial real estate has experienced an increasing mountain range of challenges over the past year as the world shuttered up and offices emptied. From your perspective, what has been the real impact of COVID-19 on commercial real estate?
Man, it's interesting. I left summer of 19, so it's interesting how life kind of works. And we have a perfect view of what happened behind us. We only get like one step ahead of what's in front of us. And so I knew I was burnt out. Some of this was very personal for me. We have two daughters, and they were getting close to junior high school, and I think most people probably appreciate when you're a parent, you start counting summers and it gets real, and you go, holy smokes, if I can mess up work. Work never always loves you back. But if I mess up these pivotal years, I'll hate myself for the rest of my life. And so I needed, but I also knew that the industry was just dying on the office side for something better. So I had done what I felt like was everything I could accomplish. Parkway had been wonderful, tremendous opportunity. At the end, I was, even as CEO, more on the consulting side, running around and helping get set up places like Brickell and Raleigh and in Atlanta and some of the places you name. And so I just felt like we were overdue. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I still have a piece of paper I scribbled down, and I said where I could go. And I had talked to people, and they said, look, if you can stomach being dislodged and explain that away on your LinkedIn account, you probably getting that headspace back, to which I hadn't been able to do. I didn't realize it until I left. You get in a grind. Houston had been still a very unforgiving office market. And that's not fun. I mean, I'll just tell you, it's not fun when you're in a bad environment. Not that you're supposed to have fun, but I wasn't really being very creative anymore. I lost some of that edge. Lo and behold, we get COVID. And even probably the most prophetic thing I heard is December of 19, I met Lisa Picard, who's just amazing CEO, runs EQ for Blackstone, very forward-leaning. And she is someone I'd gotten to know. I just had spent the fall reaching out and almost like an intern again, just anybody that I thought was as smart as they came in the industry. I was trying to get smarter, not than them, than I was, just trying to, just consume this. And we were at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, December of 19. And I said, what do you think you're going to spend 20 thinking about? She goes, I'm going to spend 20 thinking about work from home. Wow. And, and I go, wow. I mean, nobody was talking about this. Nobody was talking about this in 19. And I remember going, tell me more. What's going on here? And she goes, I said, because I think I agree, but I want to hear you say it. And she said, I don't think the competition is the building down the street anymore. And work, as we've defined it historically, does not need to happen in a dedicated space. And that's what COVID did. I mean, COVID just, boom, here it is. And it turned the industry, it's still turning the industry on its head. We've learned a lot of things. We've learned that every state has behaved totally differently. So if you're, a company, and I think the other thing, Armando, is if you even back out of the industry and just talk about what has this done to corporate. So, if I was selling hamburgers at McDonald's and your customer base now just blew through the doors, kind of stopped, but now they walk in, and every time they walk in, they're like, where are the tacos? And what, the tacos? What? You almost had to back up, and I think it's underappreciated, is the fact that the core customer is arguably as confused as it's ever been. And so I think, between that, you have a relatively sleepy industry that hasn't had to change in decades, that's housing and servicing a customer base that arguably has had the same thing, unless you're in the Bay Area or somewhere else. I'm in Houston. I can tell you, energy company tends to be very traditional. And so I think COVID just kind of just all at once, you had that all come in a big storm, and lasted way longer than anybody thought.
Yeah. No, I think it's really changed a lot. And I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, the risk of substitute competition, right? Where for a while, the industry was a little bit more focused on, are they going to opt for the traditional pathway for leasing offices, or are they going to go for this new co-working model? It turns out that now more than ever, people are saying neither. I don't want to go to the office, right? And I think what comes to mind is that now more than ever, commercial real estate needs to adapt, right? As you were saying, if you go to a McDonald's, or if you run a McDonald's, right, and the customers are asking for the kimchi fries or the brisket or the pizza, right? How do you respond to that? Because that's not your inherent value prop.
Right. I think for me, you have to, one of the challenges that is real. I mean, this is a real, arguably office is the most capital intensive, lowest margin. I mean, there's so many things about it that make it the riskiest in some ways. And frankly, one of the reasons long-term leases have been part of the equation for so long is mathematics. I mean, you needed 10 years to amortize the customized 3 floors of space that you just built, because there was almost zero residual value at the end of those 10 years if they did not stay. I mean, that's what I was inheriting in Austin. And so it becomes, that's part of the reason I'm an advocate, and what I was doing with Workng. Workng was really birthed out of getting asked after COVID to take a look at, could you run these assets differently? And one of the things that, from lessons learned and WeWork and things like this, is how do we spend capital more judiciously? How do I become more thoughtful in how we assemble teams? Right. So we kind of throw the word hospitality out there, but what is that? And, I had during this period kind of drawn a graph from 2020 to 2030 and just graphed over that timeline percentage of flexible offerings available in a given asset. I think everybody agrees it's lower now than it'll be then. Mm-hmm. But waiting until then, until you have a perfect picture to get there, it's impossible. Right. And just like life, right? I mean, it's not a straight line to get from there. It's just like all of us in life. Mine's a zigzag. I mean, even now I'm taking a big zag that I never asked for to get to someplace down the road. And I think that's where office has to accept is I have to make a change in 21. And if I've got to be thoughtful and strategic about it, because that's going to help me get ready for the change I may not fully understand I need to make in 22. Mm-hmm. And you do that to get to 30 and go, wow, I'm not ever going to accommodate 100% of this. Mm-hmm. But I'm accommodating and I'm keeping up with the trend lines, and I'm not re-spending capital, because that's what's killing people on WeWork right now is, and I did this, the first one we did is I had an empty floor in a random spot in the building I couldn't lease to save my life. I stuffed WeWork in there. What I then quickly learned the hard way, which a lot of people have learned, is, oh wow, that has an impact on the elevators. That has an impact on the experience of everybody in that elevator bank. And so how do I, so the deals I did after that, I always put it on the ground floor. I always did interconnecting stairwells, which they look amazing, but I didn't do them for that. I did them to keep people out of the elevator. Right. And so those allowed me to learn and what are what am I selling? If I'm an Apple store, what am I selling? What's my product? For probably your audience, I need max flexibility. I think that's why co-working is appealing. There's no way I don't even know what I'm doing a year from now. There's no way I know what I'm doing 5 years from now. So I need your most flexible product, but I'd rather not have to leave to go talk to somebody else in a year when I've grown and I'm ready to sign for 1 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so sequencing and getting a building stacked in a way that generally is going to take you 10 years down the road. Now, you may have to tweak something, but not like now where you go, I was totally wrong. That should never have been there. Start over. That's just the absolute budget buster. It blows up everything on the real estate side. And so that to me is what has to be understood. I read a book the other day and they were talking about, it was in the franchise concept. And they said but it applies to, I'm sure it applies to me right now as kind of a new startup guys, this idea of good enough, which is a perfectionist type A. Mm-hmm. I thought that's crazy. Like good enough, that sounds like a cop out. But what I've realized is good enough gets you moving.
Yes.
And then you get better, at least for me, then I get better. But if I sit there waiting for perfect, which I can do, mm-hmm. I always told our team, I said, I would rather move now with an 80% solution than wait for 100. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the industry has to, they just have to get, but we're finding it. I mean, you can tell every once in a while, you'll read a real estate expert go, every 2 weeks, I feel like I read an expert say, oh, we're good. They're all coming back. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, okay. I'm an office guy. You see where I'm sitting. It's not in the office. I haven't been in the office in 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And I think I oftentimes see that as well with many different founders in different industries where perfectionism stops momentum. And that stop of momentum really delays opportunities or luck in general. I think, in your case, the adaptability is super important. I'd like to get really quickly sort of your thoughts and perhaps insight as to what you think the future of work is for the near term, but maybe the next 5 to 10 years, because it's been in the air, right? I think half a year ago, you saw a lot of these very big corporations, big banks, big tech companies effectively saying, you know what, this new normal is really working for us from a fundamental business standpoint. It makes sense that we shouldn't have to all be in the office all the time. We want to embrace the hybrid model of work from home and sometimes flex in office. But suddenly over the past month or so, we've been seeing a lot of companies turn on that, right? Where they're saying, actually, no, we want to go back full into the offices. A lot of the big banks have already set hard dates to bring back all of their armies of analysts and bankers. Where do you think it's headed? Do you think there's going to be some compromise, or are we just back to the office?
It's somewhere in the middle, right? I think, even getting ready for this, I thought over my past year, like a lot of people, Zooms like this a lot, which I thoroughly enjoy. Technology has been great in that way. But if you said, Mike, what are some of the highlights of your last year? Where have some of your best ideas for what you're doing come from? They've come in person. I mean, and I think for this audience and especially companies, I feel like there's a little bit of treading water. I want to max out the human connection. I want to max out, because right now, you see a brochure or some flyer on LinkedIn for a redone lobby in downtown Houston, which is where I live. And I think, I know that's broker to broker, and that may be a different kind of messaging. But if I'm at home an hour away, seeing that actually just reminds me of a whole bunch of things I probably didn't necessarily like. Whereas I think we want to get back to a place where the messaging, I told this to a group the other day, what's the message? What would connect with you? Hey, don't you miss seeing Joe and Bill? And don't you miss sitting? I mean, one of the things I learned when I was in Austin was like, okay, what's the science behind Facebook and all these guys essentially feeding people 3 meals a day?
Right.
And they said, look, it's at the time, I don't know, 75 million. But we get that back in spades because the quality of the interactions, the quality of the ideas that are birthed out of those moments when people are breaking bread and having a conversation is real. And so But that's going to be tough for an owner, because what that really requires, Armando, is financially people to rebuild their income statement.
Right.
That means you have to develop new revenue streams where you monetize those interactions, where you have technology that feeds those interactions, where you have the Airbnb type moments where you have more frictionless transactions. The process to get into office space is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
It's super painful. I mean, especially for a startup, it's daunting. I mean, I've experienced it a little bit the last month or so as just a guy thinking about doing some stuff, and I'm going, oh my gosh, we make this hard.
Yeah.
So that I think those things have to come together: the human interaction, the ease of transactions, the flexibility, real time, real demand. I don't mind paying for it, but I want to feel like I'm getting some value for that.
Exactly. No, and we've seen it as well here at Newchip this week. In fact, we flew in many employees from around the country here to Newchip because most of them, everybody has their vaccine now, and we wanted to have some FaceTime, and we were able to accomplish in 3 days like 3 months of work, right? Just having that in person. But on the flip of that, we're all exhausted now. The fact that we've been so isolated at home, working from home, that it shows a lot of different contrast, right? What working at home does and what working in the office, and there's a lot of benefit that comes from it. But I think somewhere in the middle is where a lot of startups and corporations will find value as they move on into this next era of normality. I wanted to point out that through your entire journey, the Army, your MBA, commercial real estate, your experience with WeWork and all of that, adaptability, grit, resilience, those are themes that bubble up as aspirational traits and key themes in your life. You've adapted to many, many different situations, especially for moments that you weren't even expecting, right? Parkway, when they gave you that big title, when they acquired that new unit and you were leading it. COVID, WeWork, et cetera. I'd love to hear really quickly your thoughts on why you believe that adaptability is so essential to building a life of success, sustainable success.
Yeah, I think, the words, it's so true. And aspirational is really the thing, because even in this world, I think I feel, old and stodgy more than I want to some days. And, but I think, I've realized if we're all chasing some of the same things, I think some of the same things have come up over and over again this last year. I want to be fulfilled. I want to do something that's lasting. I want to do, something that makes a difference, and those sort of things, the double bottom line, all those keywords, I think we all didn't know we liked as much as we do now. And I've realized complacency for me has always been the enemy of achieving and getting to those things. And even when you had originally called me, I thought, well, don't you want to wait till I have achieved something actually, because this could flame out and be just a spectacular failure. But I think that's the beauty of it, is being able to get really uncomfortable, mm-hmm. be fulfilled, and not wait till, okay, I've got it all together. And my ability just to connect with, it's just amazing how many people I've connected with in the last year or two who are just like we're talking about, who are going, I need to be a better me. I'm totally uncomfortable. I have no idea what's going to happen next. And you go, you're talking, you're singing my language. But that's something I have to push a little harder, I think, the older I get. You have more at risk. I've got all the normal pressures that come with kids that are getting closer to college, and life's more expensive and those sort of things. But I think I've had it, I've been able to recalibrate. I've been able to, even recently grow a lot more than I really thought I needed to. But and then also I call it resetting my tribe. We use the term tribe a lot, and probably the older I get, the more I realize how valuable it is to have people in and around you that support what's important to you. I would say make really good people choices. I have seen that, and then I would say recently really heard it a lot, where people that were starting up and needed either a key position in their staff, the people in the last few weeks that I've observed that have just done great, and the ones that haven't, one of the common threads is who and when they hired the right person. And almost inevitably, if somebody said, yeah, it took me 3 general managers or 3, you're like, okay, this is going to be tough. But the people that said, man, I nailed it. Then the other thing that I've seen that's a common thread is those people were working on the business and not in the business. And, that I'm learning that, right? I could be as guilty as the next person, especially right now. My wife's kind of my governor right now, unfortunately, because she'll say, okay, that's a little, that's too much micromanagement. That's not, we'll talk about it. But being able to be knowledgeable enough to be tactical, but strategic enough to know where you're heading and map that out for your team, because they don't need you in the trenches. They do. They need you to know the business, and again, that's more observation over the last few weeks specifically is things I'm going, and that's good. I knew that. I know that, but people really count. The other thing I've noticed is if you kind of rank people 3 to 5 on a 1 to 5 scale, I've met and I've done some consulting a little bit over this time, a lot on the HR. It's funny how common people, even in real estate, people problems are. And when you're startup, you don't think you can afford a 5, but you hire a bunch of 3s, which is fine. But then you start rapidly growing. You go, oh crud! I don't have a team that's keeping up with our growth. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I get a 5? And understanding that, because again, I'm living it right now, because I was asked to start something without any business. Last April, May, I'm cold calling all the people I know. All of these people are 6 to 7 figure earners. I'm going, yeah, this isn't going to work for a minute, and sequencing it. But at least getting that team right, knowing, do I need a 3? Do I need a 5? Can I stay on the business instead of in the business so we can actually grow this? Where am I trying to get to? There's no chance of ever changing anything if you don't take risk. And I was very susceptible to that. And somewhere around 19, I was like, let's do it. I have no idea. I can always go back, right? I mean, I think that's I can always, and I'm not saying go back to something that wasn't good, but I can always go to something traditional. But I will never regret not jumping out, be smart about it, know the business, don't sell something nobody wants to buy. But I think what you read when you read stuff like, Dream Big, or Clayton Christensen has some amazing, books out there on innovation, but also he has a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? Right. And so I think that's what gets me up in the morning is, okay, I might fail today, but the satisfaction, the things that I'm going to get out of that far exceed that risk of failure, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing that has been on my mind a lot, this year through the pandemic, and as Newchip itself grows and we extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone, is this notion that everything that you've ever wanted in life is outside of your comfort zone. And that very much ties into the risk aspect, right? I think there are many people who want to be entrepreneurs, but they're too afraid of taking that risk. And then there are many entrepreneurs who are afraid of taking further risks, right? To get to where they need to be so that they can achieve what they want. And I think it's something that I have, apparently you have, a lot of us, right? We need to take those big risks and embrace it in the moment, because it will make all the difference in the end.
And I think I have found, more than I appreciated, people are dying today to follow that leadership. Like, recruiting has not been my problem. Like, if getting something worth that I could actually use to recruit from, that's a challenge in a pretty entrenched real estate community. But what I've realized, the recruiting, once you have it, is easy, and that just tells me people are starved for authentic leadership, for really good ideas, and just direction and a purpose. And very few people are built or have the connections or whatever to do it, but everybody's got the capacity and the appetite to be part of something like that. And you can't do this alone. I mean, me and a bunch of ideas don't work. I need a team, and I need those. Every one of us is going to have a role. So I'm excited just because I can participate and bring people along for this ride. Part of the reason I started is I want to build the kind of culture I've always tried to build wherever I'm at, but let's just do it from the ground up. Let's do something different. Let's leave a footprint and a fingerprint that is meaningful in all the right ways in individual lives in an industry that, probably needs some help in that area.
I love it. This has been just so incredible, and hearing your journey, very inspirational. Admire the steps you've taken, many leaps of faith, I think. And I'm excited to see how the rest of your journey continues to unfold over the next months and years, and see the impact that you're going to continue to make in this planet. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. I know a lot of people in our audience have been able to take a lot of insight from your experiences all the way in the Army to real estate to where you're headed next. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope we can have you again sometime in the near future.
Thank you so much. It's truly, I'm humbled to be part of it. I love what you guys are doing. It's just an exciting group. I've learned to love entrepreneurs. It may be my new tribe. I'd have a hard time escaping. This is an amazing group. So thank you so much for just including me.